the role that we have in as AB 617 program focused steering committee. But
Okay.
I think I'm just saying we should include it, but I'm saying that I don't agree in the suggestion that Lisa made or where to include it.
Okay, then let's put it, how about this as a compromise between you and Eric, and just to get it on the agenda, let's put it after standing updates. Is that okay?
Sounds great.
Okay, Eric, we'll put you in for 7:10.
Well, yeah, we'll add it as a standing agenda item so we can talk about updates, but we will talk about clarifying the role for including agenda items and arriving at consensus at what goes on to the agenda. So thank you for bringing that up and helping elevate Eric's voice, Lisa. It'll fit under update, but know that we won't have a whole lot of time to discuss, given that it's not in the purview of this committee.
So I'm glad that you said that, Dr. Ramos, because after conversation with the author's office, there was a different position that had been offered. And so in addition to my request for the position being included as a budget item for discussion, that the Air District issue a memo to CARB legal counsel requesting clarification of my request. And I would appreciate it if the Air District would move that forward. And then any confusion or lack of clarity that the Air District has on the role of the AB 617 Implementation Committee, which the author clearly states with the implementation of the CERF.
Eric, let's discuss it when we get to it, because we're blowing the timeline already.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
We can.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the clarification, Eric. I really do. So we'll talk about it as an update, and then we can add that request. And we'll also, as usual, in the purpose of ending on time, make space to crowdsource ideas for the next agenda item. So we've noted that as a team, and we'll make sure to probe you on that, Eric. So you'll be on deck to kick us off when we get to that section. Jem?
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you all. Yes, we will revisit this. Thank you, Lisa and Eric and Dr. Amy Ramos. Okay, so we will move along then to get us going. I'm going to hand it off to Stephanie to provide some updates on the action items tracker. If you have any questions or clarifying questions, please feel free to ask Stephanie directly.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Jem, and good evening, everyone. Happy Wednesday. This item is just a routine check-in on our running action items, in which at the end of all meetings, Harder & Company reads through some of the actions from the meeting. So I will be going over the ones that came out of our last meeting. And can I get confirmation you can see my screen? Awesome. And in this corner is where you can find our running action items. I'll just zoom in here. And as usual, I'll go over some of our in-progress ones and move over to the ones that are more recent that have been completed recently. And our first item is regarding the Air District will collect information regarding the dairy operation, so producers and Mid-Valley disposal facilities to include in the stationary source discussion. And so we have a few items similar to this one. I'll just kind of blanket and generally say that for many of these items regarding stationary sources, we'll see this information become updated at a future stationary source discussion. So again, we'll provide information on producers and Mid-Valley disposal at the next stationary source discussion. We have another item regarding checking with our team about setting up air monitors at Vitro over the next few days. We do have a few items regarding Vitro glass as well. And for these items, I'll just kind of generally address that tonight. We'll have a quick verbal update regarding Vitro from Ryan later tonight. So this item and this item we'll hear a quick update about from Ryan in a little bit here. And this next item here, consider development of a system to better inform parents of children who are exposed to the pollution if major violations are occurring. And again, during our next stationary source discussion, district will provide context for the type of violations that are discussed at each of the stationary sources that we've been going over. Moving along. We also had an item regarding updating. It's the emissions inventory map to include comparison within stationary sources and between all sources. And so the Air District is working with CARB to layer mobile and area-wide source emissions with the stationary source with stationary sources on a map that will let the CSC know when it becomes available. And this next item is again about stationary sources, and this one is related to further discussion on rules and regulations of stationary sources. And so again, we will provide updated information at a future stationary source presentation. We also had an item regarding outreach to identified sources of interest to coordinate tours for CSC members, and the Air District will continue to engage with stationary source facilities in the boundary regarding CSC concerns and asks. And I'll go ahead and move along so you don't get too dizzy for my scrolling over to some of the completed items. And so there was an ask at the last meeting to provide a breakdown of Cal EnviroScreen indicators. And so OEHA, or the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, does actually have a really comprehensive breakdown of the indicators that go into the Cal EnviroScreens mapping tool. And so we've linked that here. For this next item, the city and Air District will move forward with funding the truck rerouting proposal. And we did send an email update to kind of notify CSC members of which city council meeting that it would be heard at. And we'll hear like a full update later, but just as some quick exciting news, the city council did approve the truck reroute study contract during the April 28th city council meeting. And then for this item, the present representative from Vitro will relay concerns of the CSC regarding exposed glass piles and dust to supervisor. And we did have a Vitro representative that was here to receive those comments to bring them back to their management. And those are all the items I have for tonight. Does anyone have any questions regarding these? Feel free to also pop them in the chat, but for now, I'll go ahead and pass back to you, Jem.
Awesome. Thank you, Steph. Okay, so we'll move on to the bulk of tonight's discussion, which will be around the budget, the AB 617 budget. So it's safe to say we're collectively aware of ways in which the current systems and infrastructures fail to properly serve communities. And however, through AB 617 and this collaborative space with local agencies and organizations, there are some things within the community's control. So this is just a gentle reminder as we enter the space to address some of these issues. And let's use this next hour and a half to have a productive and meaningful conversation about the budget. So I'll now pass it off to Nyami, our co-host, who will lead the conversation tonight.
Thank you. Well, as you all remember, we began in December the multiple part discussion about the budget. At that time, both CARB and the Air District explained to us how the money moved from whatever the allocation was in the state budget that goes to CARB, and then how CARB then sends it to the Air Districts and so on. So we thought that that was a good starting point, but by no means the only thing we need to know, and how we can provide feedback and make decisions related to the SERP implementation when we have more clarity and of the different elements of the budget. So tonight, as a follow-up discussion of that will be part 2 of several more that we will continue to have in the consecutive months, we're going to focus on just one part of that budget, which are the incentive funds that are part of the allocation for AB 617. We are not going to go in depth tonight on the implementation funds or even that other portion of the funds that the Air District has that can use in other communities in the Central Valley region-wide that are not selected communities. So that's kind of like part 3, part 4, or whatever, how many parts we want this to be split it up. But for now, we're going to talk on incentives. And the reason when I was asked what will be the next good portion to discuss, I agree that incentives were important because the way that the funding is given to the Air Districts for implementation of the SERPs has some timelines. Well, the Air District will guide us today. Would that be you, Ryan, or Brian, or who's doing that presentation?
It's me, Nyami.
Awesome. So Ryan will have these slides that will present. These are the monies that have been so far allocated for the different SERP strategies. And I think the most important part is so that we understand what is the timeline to liquidate these funds and also make decisions of how do we want to reallocate the funds as needed. For example, remember last year we made the decision of reallocating $1 million from the locomotive to the urban greening. So that's something that we can also start discussing today and identifying based on the report that they will give us, because some of the funds that have been allocated, like for air filters in the schools, are still there. And, so we'll take a look at the various incentive strategies. And then, as I said, I think today we can make decisions about what we would like to recommend in moving the money, or what do we need to do to make sure that these incentives are going to the right strategies and in the proper times. So Ryan.
Yeah, great introduction, Nyami. Really appreciate the time that you put into reviewing the materials and providing input, and how to share and discuss the information. So let me share my screen. All right, does everybody see? Pull up my chat to make sure I have that up as well. All right. So like Nyami said, this is a continuation of the discussions that we've been having with the CSC, and here's just kind of a breakdown of the different times where we've had agendized topics, and we've discussed the budget with the steering committee. So way back in November, we had a high-level overview and discussion about implementation and the budget and incentives budget. In December, we received a request for more in-depth discussion on the SERP budget and how the community steering committee can provide additional feedback, which is definitely what we're looking for to hear. And then in February, the community steering committee requested that in this meeting, that we focus on the SERP budget and the timelines, and getting into areas where we see some challenges, we need advice, we need guidance from you. And so in March, you provided us feedback on the specific information that would be helpful in clarifying some of the questions that have been raised in these previous discussions. So kind of going back to some other things that we did as well, when we talked about how can we better communicate, talk with, and work through things, we had put together some timelines when to bring stuff back to the steering committees, some monthly, some quarterly, at different periods. And so here we are in May, and so we're together to talk about how we can collaborate and look to adapt and tailor some of the SERP measures to address the needs of the community that you're seeing. So here's kind of like a diagram, and I guess I should take a step back. And so all of our Spanish-speaking members received all these documents. There will be a few slides. Nyami had a recommendation to break down a slide, and I'll point it out specifically. It looks a little bit different from the packets that were sent to you, but it's just more layout. The information is exactly the same. The community air protection incentive allocation, that golden bar, it's really talking about the money that's we received for the incentives. And so it's kind of broken down into different things. So what we've repeatedly talked about is how, as a priority, when we receive these funds, we want to focus it in the CARB selected AB 617 communities. And so that's what we've done. And so that's why you see very large allocations devoted to the programs developed by South Central Fresno, Shafter, Stockton, and then currently we're working on Arvin, Lamont. But Nyami mentioned earlier that there's the ability to spend those funds or some of those funds in other areas. And so that could be any low income and disadvantaged community. And those terms are state defined. It's not terms that we've developed or created. Those are actually very specific defined terms where that funding could be used at. So some of you may remember when we talked about it in November. This is kind of just resharing this slide, and it just kind of shows where the district has spent implementation funds, and then also on the right-hand side of that, you see the large amount devoted to, and this is specifically for South Central Fresno for your community emission reduction program. And the 2.7 is basically what's been spent, and so that's really why we're here. There's a big discrepancy between what's been allocated and what's been spent, and very excited about an event we have coming up this weekend, which will lead towards some of those funds being distributed, emission reductions being received through the transition to zero emission lawnmowers. So some of the questions that we're hoping to discuss tonight is just and get feedback on is making sure that we're transparent on the implementation of the CERP measures and where we see opportunities, where you see opportunities, where we see challenges, where you see challenges, and getting that information and incorporating it and making adjustments similar to what Nyami said, like what we did with the vegetative barriers and urban greening. We want to clarify the timelines and the funding deadlines that have been set by the state for spending these funds and completing this work for the South Central Community Emission Reduction Program. So we're just kind of following the process for that you've established for getting that guidance from you, and how we could go about potentially shifting funds to areas where there's need. And so we're going to ask you for that direction as we move through this presentation and tonight's agenda. Lastly, if, as always the case, if there's areas where there's still lack clarity or you need more information, please share that with us, and we'll continue to do our best to make those changes. So one of the big things that we've talked a lot about in the past is because the steering committees in the Central Valley have been very creative in identifying community identified projects that fall outside the existing guidelines, that we have to develop project plans that have to get approved by the California Air Resources Board. And so what you have here on this list, starting from the far right, were the ones that were originally pre-approved. That means like from day one, once the CERP was adopted, basically we could look to fund these different types of projects. That includes school air filtration, alternative fueling stations, electric school buses, switcher locomotive replacements, and heavy duty truck replacements. Under the approved, these are the ones that we worked with the community steering committee members on in developing those project plans and which have been approved. So that's alternatives to ag burn, vegetative barriers, urban greening, residential lawn and garden, commercial lawn and garden, residential wood burning. And when I say they've been approved, that doesn't mean that these can be ready to be funded. For example, in the urban greening, vegetative barriers, the agreement was that that should be an RFP process, and so we continue to work with the steering committee on that before then funds can be spent. So there's still some additional steps once it is approved as well. The submitted category are the ones that we've worked on, and the project plans, and that we've submitted to CARB for review. And hopefully, we'll be able to move those over to the approved column in which case then, we could look to hopefully start funding some of those things. And then in the drafting category, we still have a few that we're still working on developing these different project plans. And, in a lot of cases, we're working with subcommittees and other things to kind of work through like how we may be able to do that. That includes charging for anti-idling, passenger vehicle replacement, and EV mechanics training and charbroiling. So here's kind of like a breakdown. I showed that graph earlier of the over $45 million that's devoted to the South Central Fresno Community Emission Reduction Program. And then in that column that says May is where we're at right now with distributing some of those funds. And like I said, the biggest takeaway from this is just the discrepancy. We have about 3 years left, and that's a lot of work. And we're going to talk about some of the timelines that we'll have to be working towards to get those funds spent.
Brian, I see Lisa's hands up, so I don't know if you have a clarifying question or comment, Lisa.
Yeah, when I saw this, the column under May, is that the money that's already been spent?
It's either spent or contracted.
Okay. Because, even if you put in parentheses, year to date, that would tell me that that's the money that's already been spent or obligated. So just a heads up.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is, you want to talk about the timelines to spend this funding. And so, when the Community Emission Reduction Program was approved, that basically started the 5-year clock to implement the measures of the program. And so one of the things that we have to be able to do is we have to, get those some of the things require contracts and other things or claims to be paid, and that has to be done before December 2024 to make sure that it's going to meet that timeline. And so we do believe that a buffer is needed in that timeline because there's other steps that need to happen, such as processing some of these things. And so that's why we have that kind of deadline of December 2024. And here's some of the things that we have to consider for some of the projects that we have, like urban greening and vegetative barriers. They'd have to be contracted by December of 2022 to give the contractors at least 2 years. This is not like a hard deadline, but this is just our estimation based on kind of what we're seeing. That would give them basically 2 years to spend that $1 million for each of them. And so, I mean, it's a lot of funding, and as we've seen, 2 years goes by really fast. And so when we're looking at that one, we're definitely aiming to have the commitments by December of this year. For heavy duty projects like trucks, school buses, we're thinking that they have to be contracted by June of 2023. And that's based on some of the feedback we're getting with delivery times of the equipment. And so it's not getting those under contract, it's actually they have to receive the equipment. And so right now what we're seeing, there's such a huge high demand, and then there's also, due to COVID and other things, there's been a huge supply chain issue. And so we're right now seeing about 18 months for those pieces of equipment to be delivered. And so we have that mindset that by June of 2023, we really need to get those things under contract. For light duty projects, we're thinking that those would have to be contracted by December of 2023, because when we have those agreements in place with those people, we usually give them 1 year to make those purchases, and kind of for those same reasons that we talked about, the equipment that they're looking to buy too. It's high demand, very limited supplies of things right now. Now, hopefully, over the next year or so, maybe some of these things change, and in which case maybe some of these timelines may adjust. But we're kind of forecasting in the future. We're trying to do our best impersonation of Nostradamus in predicting the future, but that's kind of where we're getting those numbers. And then on some of the community-based residential projects, for ones that require contracts, we believe that it would need to be done by March of 2024. And that gives the residents 9 months to purchase and submit claims for reimbursement for the things that they've purchased, such as, whether it's replacing their existing wood-burning fireplace with an alternative. Is there any questions on that?
I have a question just in general, and this is more for car. So is there, like, how firm are these timelines in, for the spending of these funds? Is there some wiggle room to, like, if there's a delay or whatever, that these deadlines could be extended?
Hey, Nyami, this is Brian from CARB. So as far as like the liquidation deadlines for the incentives, like those are hard. There's much wiggle room. I also had Neva Lowry here, and the district knows this as well about how those work. But as far as liquidation deadlines for the incentive funds, those are like, and actually Neva can correct me, I think they are actually by the legislature. Are those imposed, or is it our guidelines?
Yeah, the appropriation provides the liquidation deadline. For the first year of funds and the second year of funds, there was an extension due to COVID. And so basically there's a 5-year liquidation period. So the first year of funds were appropriated in fiscal year 17-18. And so the 5 years from that time, they have to be liquidated, which means that all of the equipment have to be fully operational and all the funds have to be paid in full. And I think that's where Ryan is saying that there needs to be some time after it's contracted to actually make all the payments and make sure that all the trees are planted or all the vehicles are operational. So that's what we consider liquidated. And so once that happens, then those funds are liquidated. There's 5 years to do that. So the fiscal year 17-18 funds have 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23. So they have to be liquidated by June 30th, 2023.
And we're using a couple different funding pots for that, and that's why you see some of those dates extending out beyond the 2023 date. But really, the dates that we're using is about kind of the 5-year implementation period for the South Central Fresno SERP. All right. I'm going to move on to the next slide.
Excuse me, I had my hand up.
Oh.
Can you
Sorry,
go back?
Lisa, it like didn't pop up. Go for it.
Can you go back to that slide?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I understand greening and vegetation should be done on time. What I have a question is any sort of heavy duty vehicles. They typically can come out in, oh goodness, chassis are built about September, October, and that's when the big contracts are let for the vehicles. And sometimes they can be delayed anywhere from 6 months to a year. And if the schools encounter that with the buses, my question is there any sort of wiggle room for that bucket of money to extend it? And also too, if the vehicles don't come in by the time of the deadline, excuse my dog, she is like going crazy for some reason. If the vehicles don't come within the timeline, because I know that when you're purchasing vehicles, you have to go out there and basically touch them and hug them and make sure the lights are and the blinkers work and all that, because I used to do that. Is there any way that that pocket of money can be extended due to what I see happening in the metals and commodities market at the moment, supply chain issues, because we're going into a big one this fall, guys.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that I think we're going to, keep an eye on. And I mean, it's been good working with the CARB staff when we've identified issues or potential issues, and what are options that are available. And I think as we get closer to some of those dates and we have a little bit more clarity or understanding, then I think we would probably bring something back to the committee to discuss that further. And the things I showed a little bit earlier kind of highlighted that these are going to be regular discussions, like planned discussions that we're going to have with the committee, and so like plan to keep you fully updated on all those.
Yeah, because we might want to try to front load as much of this as possible because of supply chains. Because, for example, right now the the spring wheat isn't sown because the fields in Iowa are wet, which I know doesn't impact this, but it's going to impact bread prices literally by the end of summer. If you're going into a medical procedure in which you need a dye contrast, there's currently a shortage, and they're on the verge of rationing who gets it and who doesn't. So, there are these little markers that you typically don't see in society that are starting to pop up, even like the milk shortage for babies. But, you're dealing with hard, durable goods and metal and steel, and most of that comes from China. So, and with everything that's going on there at the moment, and with their latest variant shutdown, like what's going on in Shanghai, and the variant 4 and 5 being of a variants of interest, we seriously have to look at supply chain issues at this point. And what is the state going to do if there's those issues, appear with steel and with filters, even the filters, there could be a supply chain if it's coming from China. Or are we going to do American made only? I mean, I don't know. What's Carb's opinion on that? Thank you.
I mean, yeah, this is Brian from CARB. I mean, that's tough. Like the legislature can, I mean, like Neva mentioned with COVID, those extreme circumstances, they did adjust liquidation timelines and all that. So I can't speak for the legislature, but I think they will do everything possible to make sure this money gets spent in these communities. I think I can guarantee that. Yeah.
Let's move to the next slide. Thanks. So some of the ones that were, we talked about earlier that we were going to raise, from our perspective, if we have any concerns about whether or not maybe funding can be spent or will be spent. And so one that we've talked about with the steering committee has been the school air filtration funds. And it really has to do with the large amount of CARES funding that all school districts pretty much received. And our understanding in talking with various school districts that it seemed like a lot of that funds, they were planning on improving filtration within the schools. So, we're still trying to gather information. We had a really great conversation. There's been some leadership change at Fresno Unified. And so we had a meeting with the assistant superintendent, Alex Bellinger, and Paul Idzvug, who's the chief operating officer for Fresno Unified, about these issues. And we'd asked them if we provide them a listing of all the schools in Fresno Unified and asked for an update on where they're at with evaluations for each of the schools. And so we're hoping to get that information back, because of like what we're talking about here. I mean, we're under hard pressed with some of these timelines, and so if they don't believe that they're going to be using it, then we would have a discussion about where maybe this can be used. I see Dr. Curry's hands up.
Yeah, thank you for talking about this a little bit more. And I'm still remembering that the amount of money that the school district received for the purpose of updating their HVAC, and the fact that they had done very little with that funding. Why do we think that we would still want to work on air filtration with them? And would this money be better spent if we were to move it to something like electric buses? I'm not I hear what you're saying about new leadership at Fresno Unified, but it seems that there's been an extended period of time where they've had access to funds and haven't used them in the way that we thought was most appropriate and most important for students' health. So I would be concerned about holding on to these funds and allocating them for school air filtration when they have money to do some things and haven't done it. And it just seems like we would be serving our students better if we were investing in something else that we could have some accountability and make sure that, you know, students really are benefiting.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would be my concern, that we would not just leave this for another 6 to 8 months if they haven't done anything with the money they've had previously.
Yeah, my hope is to get something, you know, within the next few weeks from them, hopefully, and, you know, bring that information back to the steering committee. You know, with, you know, if they do have a request, you know, bring it along with the request, and then at that point, with both the information from the school district, what their potential requests would be, and then, you know, kind of get feedback and guidance from the steering committee on, you know, what your views on that are. So I think we're not looking to kind of wait that long, Dr. Curry, because, you know, we like we said, I mean, it's definitely a pressing issue, and, you know, we would like to get direction much sooner than that.
Yeah, I still want to, you know, think about the lack of accountability.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if we had not seen sort of some notations or some reporting about what had not been done with the existing funding, that we might still be thinking this is really an excellent idea and a good place to invest our funds. But given that they haven't been responsive, that there hasn't been accountability, even if they come back and say, yes, of course, we'd love to be able to have this money to do X, Y, and Z, I don't think that we have a pattern of accountability that should make us feel comfortable with leaving this amount of money in this space for them to make another request, because there hasn't been accountability at all with what they do have. So I still would push for us to be willing to move this somewhere where we have in place an accountability plan and can make sure that this really does go for students to make sure that their health gets better.
Yeah, no, definitely hear you and appreciate that feedback, Dr. Nyami.
I think I agree with Dr. Curry, but at the same time, I'm also kind of torn, right, with the issue of, especially when that article in the Fresno AB came out, when they were comparing how Clovis Unified had actually used the money to improve the air filtration in the classrooms, and Fresno Unified did not. So I agree the point that it's kind of tricky to give money to an entity that already failed to use properly resources that were given by another public entity. So definitely, but at the same time, I feel for that at the end of the day, that children are paying the consequences of that wrongful way of administrating funds and taking decisions that Fresno Unified, showed. So I don't know. I don't know if there could be a way of tying the let's say, I don't know how you guys can do it, but for example, they don't get all the funds or just a partial funds until they demonstrate to you that they had actually not only purchased but installed the filters. So that way we know that the money is going to be actually spent and the health of the children are not going to be compromised.
Yeah, I won't, Brian Dodds, who's a program manager in our Systems department's on here as well. But my understanding is that basically we don't give any funds until they have a contract with a third-party provider that's going to do the specific work. And basically the only time they would get paid is, I believe, Brian, once the work is completed. Is that right?
Yes, they'd have to complete the work, submit invoices, show that it's all done before any dollars would get paid out for those types of projects.
Yeah, and it's not like we would turn over 1.5 million to Fresno Unified for them to do it. They would have to commit to doing the work, do the work, then the people that did the work that would get paid.
So it's basically a reimbursement program.
I see Dr. Curry's hand is up. If you want to quickly answer that question.
Lisa, did you get your question answered?
No.
So I wouldn't
Fine.
term it as a reimbursement. It's basically, it's contract work. And so they would get paid as part of that contract.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just curious if there was anything that Fresno Unified would need to do before they would need funds for the school air filtration. Is there some structural changes that they needed to make or would need to make that would preclude them doing any work that would need this next phase? Is it a phased sort of transition? Would they need to do structural changes? Would they need to make investments prior to the time when they would need these funds to do the filtration portion? Because if so, then we would again be looking at the timeline and whether or not that matches what is currently outlined right now.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we were hoping to get from them. Like, we want to know what they've evaluated, what their plans are, what they're going to do with those individual schools. What those timelines may look like. So, and seeing how that would work for the timelines that we have and as part of this program.
Just one last thing, there's no duplication in terms of what they were supposed to do with the CARES funding and what we think this money would do for them around the school air filtration. They're not one and the same. They're not duplicates of any of the services or the changes that they would need to make. Is that correct?
So yeah, there's like the way CARES funding was given, it was really broad in the way that it can be used by schools, and school districts are using the funds a little bit differently. But our understanding, the way that Fresno Unified said, like, they were going to spend a considerable amount on it, on upgrading their HVAC systems, and so
was there upgrading a prerequisite for them needing this particular kind of an air filtration system?
Not for all the classrooms. So what I
Uh-huh.
recall, if I may chime in here, there was a meeting that several of us participated, and I think that the key thing there was that the trustees, several of the trustees that are part of this area were present, and I think that's when, if you have your boss there saying, yes, let's do it, the person in charge was like, oh yeah, we're gonna do it, but still they were showing and expressing some reservation. For example, there are some mobile port, like, how to call it, like, not that your regular building, but portables. Yes.
Mhm.
So they were afraid that the portables would need more adjustments, for example, but it was not the case for all of the classrooms. So that was the part where I think they dropped the ball big time, because they never returned and told the air district, this of all the schools that are in the AB 617, these are the classrooms that are ready, just that we're just putting the filters, and these are the ones that would need, some adjustments. So I think that hopefully we can get that information. And again, I think that obviously we're probably not going to have the time to wait for them to do any upgrades in these other portable classrooms, but at least they could cover the ones that are ready for the filters. And as far as your comment of this is something that will be not duplicative of the care funds, well, yes and no, because it would definitely serve the same purpose of the air filters that they did not install for whatever reasons. And what they did with that money, that's a really good question that I'm not able to answer.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I'm very hopeful we can have a better update next month, and we can discuss it further then.
Bill, I see your hand is raised. Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Bill, did you have a comment or question? You're still muted. Oh, there you go.
Yes, I was wondering if the schools didn't need the funds, did we ever come up with any money that maybe residents could use for filtration in their homes. Maybe they
That-
couldn't afford it. And,
That is
you
an
know,
excellent point. We have not made that discussion, but that's why we're having this discussion, because we can come up with that. In our SERP, we did not include any strategy that would, give that type of filtration for homes. And I know that some other communities, I believe it was Chapter in Stockton, did include that. So I think that's why we're having this discussion. Do we want to say, okay, well, the school has given us all these missing information, they're not moving quick, there's another bureaucratic entity, so maybe a quicker way of putting this money to good use and to mitigate the problem of indoor air quality is switching the funds into homes, for example.
yes, and the children are home, is particularly the last 2 years, where they weren't even able to go to school. They're home so much more. And, you also have their families and so forth. I think the need could be even more so. If the schools have plenty of money available through other means, could we focus on perhaps giving, families some sort of help financially, even if it's one of those portable filtration units, but I think whatever we could do to move, if the schools have plenty of money, I would suggest that we move it to where it's needed much more, especially if there's no other means for these residents to get help, particularly if they have a medical problem, So anyway, that was just my suggestion.
That's a great suggestion, Bill, and I think we can take notes and then see if this is a recommendation that our entire steering committee wants to make. And again, remember, I think we did not include this as part of our initial conversation, but I just want to remind ourselves that this is part of our role, right? We like when we move the money from the locomotive to the urban greening, that's our role. We recommend, we all vote, and we say this is a recommendation. At the end of the day, the Air District Board would have to, confirm that the money will be relocated, but that's our role. And if we want to make that decision tonight, that's something that we can take, a vote at once we hear all the different strategies. And I see your hand is raised, Genevieve. You want to go ahead?
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to agree with that suggestion. If this money's not being used, I would definitely want it in people's homes. I don't know how many air cleaners we could purchase with this kind of money. And as Bill suggested, potentially we would prioritize homes with children and seniors and those with heart and lung conditions so that they could get air filters in their homes. And I also see that Kimberly in the chat said that she agrees with this as well.
So in terms of process, I think there's already several comments in favor of this idea. Shall we pause and take a
Nyami,
vote?
real quick, I'm in the last slide, kind of.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's what I wanted to see.
So we have several of the things that we've kind of captured in previous CSC meetings and suggestions that you've had on some opportunities. And so maybe if we can hold that and then.
Okay. Yeah, let me just, I think I see another hand raised. So Wanola, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, Wanola here. I just wanted to add a quick comment with the school funding. I don't know if this idea has been thought of, but maybe doing a campaign with students at Fresno Unified Schools. I think that's a good option to get younger community members involved because they are students and this is the world that we're leaving them in. So I feel like that's just something I feel like I would definitely appreciate if I was still in high school. And I feel like, especially now that climate change is such a big issue, I know that a lot of younger students would love to hear more about it, have presentations, maybe have someone come speak about it, maybe do class stuff about it. I think definitely can be related into or about education. So that's all I wanted to add real quick.
Really quick, Nyami, I'd just like to add on to that. I think that is an excellent idea that Winola brought up, because then the students will be able to tell us about the air in the classrooms. We'll be able to hear it directly from them. So I do agree with that point as well. And I just wanted to go on record saying that.
Thank you, Kim. Point noted. I don't see any more hands raised, so you want to
I
go?
actually have my hand raised.
Sorry, I cannot see all the little screens, but go ahead, Lisa.
Well, couple of thoughts here. First off, you know, we've been dilly-dallying with this issue for 2 years, and I don't know who shoulders, who faults it is that we haven't had a plan from the school district. But if I was the school district and I saw this pot of money, I would jump high and ask, what do we need to do and how fast we can do it? I would give them a deadline and say, we need your plan or else we got to move the money because we have a sunset on the money. As far as going into classrooms, I believe I may have suggested that over a year ago, or some information being sent home with the kids and why. And there was all sorts of problems people came up with on that from primarily the air district. So, you know, we stand here in this moment of making a decision whether to add filtration to schools or to move the money. I think that we should consider moving the money if the school district doesn't get their act together. It really is on them, because with COVID, they had an influx of COVID dollars to get their shit together and they haven't. The one thing I'm thinking about is what can be done fast is, like I proposed before, was why can't we give people gift certificates to, like, for example, to Fresno Ag to go and pick up filters that fit their air conditioning system. What would it be like to get a big contract on air filters, this little HEPA filtration things like I have that I spent $40, but I really would like a bigger one. Just like they're doing the lawnmowers. We could do something like that really quickly to get those sorts of filtration systems out in people's homes when the kids are home. Because right now, you know, when you're talking about going out to the schools and talking to kids, yeah, you're not going to have enough time. School's over in 3 weeks for summer break. So, you know, yet again, we blew yet another school year. And so we have to really look at some of the hard things here and how we got here and some of the missed opportunities. And I'm not saying placing blame, but, you know, we are here not because of our suggestions and not because of what we as a committee have wanted to do. So, you know, I'm into, let's get some, filters, get a contract with Fresno Ag, you know, somebody local. And you could do the same thing like you're doing right now with the lawnmowers. What size do you need? We'll give you a coupon for a free one over at Fresno Ag, and life is good. Because, you know, the bottom line is fire season's coming up, guys.
Yep. No, that's totally true. And I think those are all great suggestions to have, you know, maybe a timeline and a deadline. And, you know, then if we don't hear or whatever, we can move it to make the recommendation of moving it to different alternatives, either the filters that you are saying and or air cleaners for the home. So I think we can definitely make like a broad recommendation later on when we vote. And then we can, just as we do, for example, we have not discussed in a steering committee meeting the full details of the RFP for the urban grading. We have a subcommittee for that. So I think that's something we can, the details and all that we can discuss at a subcommittee that would have to be like next week or so. But for now, we should have like an agreement of what we want to do in terms of recommendations. Laura, I see your hand raised, but sorry, right now it's only steering committee members that are able to make comments. So we're gonna continue with the presentation and we'll let you know when there's a public comment at the end of our meeting. Ryan?
Thanks,
All right,
Nyami.
thank you. Thank you, Nyami. And sorry, Ryan, really quickly, I just want to point to the chat. We had a question from Genevieve. Sorry, I have to scroll now. The question was, has CARB approved a protocol for spending money on in-home air filtration? Can someone from CARB address that?
So
Oh.
they don't have there's not been a community identified project plan that's been approved. And the way that process, so Genevieve's first question was, is there already a state program? Is it already covered under the existing state guidelines, in which case it could be funded, and it's not. The one program or measure that was included in Stockton, it was done under the community identified projects, which requires the district to develop a incentive project plan. Those are the ones that get sent to CARB for approval. We're currently have a very productive subcommittee with Stockton, and we're working on that. But even once that is approved for Stockton, it's not a matter of that it's approved for all the other communities. We would still have to submit another project plan for South Central Fresno. Now, hopefully, because hopefully through the things that have been learned, that process is supposed to be expedited, so it's supposed to be quicker. But it would still have to go through the same process of being approved by CARB. And like procedure-wise too, and this is a step that we would have to take. That's a new program for the district. That is something that we'd have to take to our board for them to approve that new program, similar to like what we've done for urban greening and vegetative barriers. All right. Well, really good conversation. I appreciate that. So the next one we want to talk about is the locomotive switcher replacement. So these are not the long haul locomotives that only that travel long distances. These are the ones that are used to put together the trains, and so these are the ones that stay in the community and operate in the community. And so when we worked with the community, worked with the CSC. We made a commitment of $4.1 million, which would replace about 3 of these. These are oftentimes some of the dirtiest locomotives. Oftentimes they're run by what's called a Tier 0 diesel engine, which basically has really no control technology and emit a lot of pollutants. And so that's why you see that number 67 tons just for those 3 switchers being replaced. And that's a lot. We've been engaging with companies that use these in the community. We were successful in getting one to replace it. It was Penny Newman replaced one of their older ones with a Tier 4. And so, but there's still $3.7 million left remaining. And while we continue to try to seek out additional partners, because there's still funds that they have to spend on their behalf. It's not just they get a brand new switcher. So we're still seeing if there's other partners out there who would be interested. And so what we recommend is continuing to assess this and kind of work through March of next year. And if we don't see any movement then we'd probably bring back a recommendation to look for other areas to spend that funding.
And I see Genevieve, your hand is up. Go for it.
Thanks. I hate to be confrontational here, but I think this is one of the issues with the AB 617 program in its entirety is that it's been largely an incentive-based program without strong regulations. And so if we had some new regs that were pushing these companies to reduce their emissions, then I think we would see a lot more interest in using the incentive money to reduce emissions. So I just want to express that kind of frustration there.
Yeah.
Because we all know that incentives that lead to a rule are what really work.
Yeah. So I mean that's a great point that you bring up, Genevieve. And so I could tell you from our perspective, locomotives are an area of concern. And I think what's, it's been discussed here, it's been discussed in other places. Locomotives fall strictly under federal regulations. Now, CARB is in the process of working also on a locomotive regulation that would require companies to put money into like a fund that would then be used to replace older locomotives, but that would be years and years down the line. In regards to like local control for locomotives, both at the state level and the local level, we don't have any authority over that. I mean, we have that is definitely one of the areas that we are pushing EPA and the federal government in our effort to reduce mobile source emissions, not only from that, but from heavy duty trucks and all other things, because that is such a huge contributor. It's the majority of the emissions in the Central Valley come from mobile emissions. And so, yes, we agree. Putting in better, stronger regulations to require these pieces of equipment to be removed and replaced faster, it benefits everybody. And so, yeah, we're fully supportive of measures to do those things.
Thanks, Ryan. I'll just add that I know the South Coast is in the process of developing an indirect source rule for rail yards. And so the districts do have a unique authority when it comes to reducing emissions from sources that attract mobile sources. And so there's that. I think the district could do more on indirect sources. And then I also know CARB can regulate sources of toxic emissions. And we know that diesel is a toxic air emission. And so there was I think a CARB rule back in the day on stationary diesel engines. So I think our agencies do have some power here. But the last thing I'll say is there's also a lot of really great things happening on hybrids and electrification of some of this equipment. And so just moving things from diesel to diesel, I think is no longer acceptable. And I wouldn't like to be spending money on new diesel equipment.
Yeah, so we've partnered on several of those projects, Genevieve, and happy to on some of these hybrid projects. Fortunately, we were able to bring some of these types of engines and put them into use for the first time anywhere in the country. The issue that we're finding on some of these is the types of equipment that are being used. They don't have those specific types of equipment yet. Where the focus for those is more of the longer range versus some of the more local central use. And so while we're always interested in looking for people that are looking to kind of delve into that sector, and we're starting to hear that there may be some in the works, but that's still probably a little bit down the way.
Thank you for your question, Genevieve. I do want to note that we had 3 fellow CSC members agreeing with your point about the lack of enforcement and the issues with incentive-based programs. I see Lisa's hand is up, so Lisa, I'll call on you, and then Nyami, you unmuted. Do you want to add something?
Well, no, I was just gonna say, I think I also saw Brian put his hand up, so.
Oh, yeah, and I mean, you all are so eloquent and way smarter than me that you kind of said what I wanted to say. But I guess just real quickly, from my personal perspective, like with these incentives, it does suck that a lot of these companies aren't doing what we think they should do anyway. But I think that I try to look at it as maybe a strength of AB 617. Like that was the point. Like sometimes when people won't do what they do, you got to incentivize it. So these incentives are there for this exact purpose. Whether or not we think these companies should do it anyway. And I just want to mention also big NOx reductions with these really dirty, when Ryan mentioned tier 0, like they're tier 4 as they move up cleaner, like diesel engines now, right? So these are super dirty. And in addition to the NOx reductions, you see a lot of diesel particulate matter reductions, which Genevieve mentioned is a known toxic. It's a TAC, right? That is cancer causing. So these things are really dirty, and removing them can help. But obviously, yeah, that's just my personal opinion. And again, yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Thank you, Brian. Lisa, go for it. And then Kim, you're next.
Well, I think G is brilliant, but I also think that, either the industry, whoever's going to receive this money and equipment needs to get off the pot. And I do mean get off the pot. And let's either spend this money and prove it. I have to agree with her on going electric and alternative is way better. And if they choose not to do it, we need to also give them a timeline of maybe September. Let's not wait so long. Because what's happening, if you guys start to see this pattern here, we're waiting and waiting and waiting. And what's going to be happening is we're burning through time to actually do allocations and spending. And so if they're not going to spend the money and if they don't want it and it's there for them, then what needs to happen is we need to reallocate it to somewhere that will be of benefit to the community and let the air district go after them with some regulations or do whatever we need to do federally. That's it.
So, I appreciate that. I think the reason why we recommended March, I think we're going to talk about other things. And I think what we could probably do too is, not wait to talk about where there's going to be opportunities maybe to shift funds and look to do that and like have a plan so that way, like March comes around, it's not, okay, let's now think about things. Hopefully working with you, we'll have a plan, then we can just look to it and shift those funds. The only reason I recommend, because this program is about improving air quality. And it's just like, this is one of the major contributors where you get a lot of emission reductions in addition to toxic emission reductions. And so if we can get these, I mean, it is a big benefit with reducing individual exposure to those harmful air pollutants. So, I mean, I would still recommend looking at March, at the same time developing plans on how we may shift those funds if we need to.
And Ryan, how long have we been working at getting this done now? How many years?
Yeah, these are definitely not short-term programs, and they do take time.
I personally want to know, we have this like timeline, a defined timeline of spending the money. We've defined this project. Where are we at toward implementation? How close are we into implementation or even getting to that point?
No, and that's the purpose for today and what we've been talking about.
How many years in?
Little over 2.
I'll give you till October, November at the latest, but not March. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And that's why, I was really concerned that we have all the time that we needed for this discussion, because the clock is ticking. And I agree, we should have had this discussion last year, not right now, but we cannot reverse time. So let's just make the best that we can with what we have, the information that we have now, and act on it. So is this the last? No, I see there's more slides. Go ahead, Brian.
There's three more, just a couple more. This is the one that we've talked about, and this is the one where the CSC said it's not an area of importance because these are more line haul, these are long distance, and so they don't reside, they don't stay in the community. And so this is where we pulled some of the funding from before. And so kind of right now where we're at is there's still $4 million remaining in this that we would look to reallocate to some of the other measures or new measures.
Really quick, Kim, I saw you had your hand up and you lowered it. Just want to check if you had a question or you changed your mind.
No, I don't have a question. I just had a general, just a comment. I really appreciate Brian's comment, putting his personal opinion in it, but it would really, really help if you guys would keep your hat on in the roles that you play when you're talking to this to help enforce this. So we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation, because you guys know it's not right. You guys know it's not healthy, but you're not speaking up, or we don't hear you speaking up, or we don't hear anything. I can't speak for the rest of the commission, but just hearing that statement, knowing that it was wrong in your personal opinion, knowing it's unhealthy, but in your role, you can change it. You can advocate for it.
Yeah, Kimberly, that's one of the things I was talking about. And I know Genevieve brought up that there's a possibility South Coast may do something with indirect source review. We were the first ones anywhere in the country to have an indirect source review rule, and it got challenged all the way to the Supreme Court. We thankfully won, which allowed us to regulate those things. And so I see Genevieve. Well, and Genevieve, I mean, one of the things that we're watching right now too is that's currently also being, there's legal action that's going against that as well. And so we are paying close attention to what's going on, and we constantly evaluate all of our rules and regulations and looking for additional opportunities to get emission reductions in the valley. So I mean, I think one could say it took how many years after we had our indirect source review before South Coast passed an indirect source review. I mean, they kind of did the same thing. They waited to see what happened with our lawsuits and before they began development. But in regards to enforcing, I want to make sure that we're on the same page here. It's not a matter of enforcing rules and regulations against. There's nothing we can do to require them to remove those engines right now, as it stands.
But I disagree, because it's wrong. So when they go to get their permits or get any type of thing that they're trying to operate, and they have to go in front of someone, you can send in a letter, or you can appear and make a statement yourself. I mean, there's things that can be done. That's all I'm saying.
So what we do, Kim, because it falls under the federal government, we are very active in pushing the federal government to come up with rules and regulations to strengthen mobile source emission reductions, including heavy duty trucks, locomotives being some of the primary examples. We are very vocal. I mean, we send lots of letters to EPA talking about this very issue and pushing them to make those changes.
Go ahead.
I want to lift up a point Kim made, and I'm sorry, I'm neutral facilitator here, but thinking about the levers that local agencies, the city, I know we're all sitting here at the table, CARB even, I'm sure there's ways to get creative in thinking about the levers you have to pull these. And it might not be a clean, strict enforcement, but to Kim's point, I think that is a point of having everyone here at the table, and you with the authority that you all have in the agencies and organizations you're in. That's that you have the power to sort of back up the community in that way, and just want to lift that up. Sorry, Kim, I cut you off. So
it's okay. That's all I was trying to say. Thank you. I have no more comments or questions.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. School buses. So we've shared with you, we've been successful at replacing several school buses in the community. We were working with Fresno Unified, and this is, we haven't gotten the applications in yet, but I'm happy with those conversations that we have with Fresno Unified. That they have told us that they are going to be, or they're looking to submit some applications soon to replace some of their school buses with electric. So that's a newer development. It wasn't in the initial document that we sent out. This is just something that they had reached out to Brian after our conversation with them, and sharing the concerns raised by the community steering committee, how important the transition away from fuel burning a fleet to an all-electric fleet for the benefit of the students. And it seemed to hit home with the individuals that we were talking to, and they seemed very interested. And so hopefully what they talked about is just the first of more that they're going to be looking to do. But we do have some suggestions here, potential options, and kind of supporting this is adding funding to support the infrastructure. That's one of the things that we're definitely hearing is needed for these to make these happen. Adding funding to put in the infrastructure needed for these. And sometimes that can be expensive, especially the specialized types of charging that the school buses need. And then our recommendation is to continue to assess through March of 2023. And if we're not seeing a lot of traction movement, then recommend potentially moving those funds.
What has been the response of other school districts? Because I understand that it was more like Fresno that were like not too sold on the idea. But for example, I know you have no problem giving Fowler a school and electric bus for Malaga, and then there's Central and all that. So have the other school districts within the area been more responsive?
So we've talked with, so there's one school in Central Unified, James Madison Elementary School, that's in the boundary. So we've primarily focused on we've outreach to Orange Center. That was another one of the school districts that was a high priority. So we've reached out to them, trying to engage and see whether or not they're able to move forward with it. Hopefully they are. We've also talked with Washington Union and Fresno Unified, in addition to Fowler Unified. So I think part of this is trying to build interest. A lot of this is new, and so it's just, I think a lot of people are waiting to hear more feedback on how it's working out for school districts that are making those transitions. And I think the more positive feedback they get about how they're able to make it work, that I think we're going to see more interest in this. And so, we had a very successful, we partnered with Modesto Unified. They just had an announcement that they purchased 30 electric school buses, and we're a project partner with Modesto Unified. And they're doing a lot of really innovative things, and hopefully the rest of the valley takes notice and uses them and as a resource to contact and find out how they're able to make it work. Because if it can work there, then it should be, you should be able to transfer that to a lot of other places. And we're in Shafter, we're talking to Richland School District, and getting some commitments from them, which is a more rural, more spread out. And so there will be other things learned through their adding electric school buses and transition to that, and then we could take to some of the more some of the school districts that maybe have bigger areas of service so they would need more miles. And I think that's some of the stuff that they're waiting to get that feedback and understanding before making that leap forward. But we're definitely trying to put those pieces together and connect people so that they have that information.
Thanks, Ryan. Genevieve, I see your hand is up, and then I'll do a quick time check after that. Go for it, Genevieve.
Cool. Thanks for this update. I would be in support of adding funding to support the infrastructure, because I know it's a critical part of making this work. And then I have a question for Brian, because I was just wondering if there is a CARB rule on school buses. I know the Innovative Clean Transit rule adopted back in 2018 requires all public transit agencies to gradually transition to zero emission bus fleets, but I don't know if that includes school buses, if they're considered transit.
That's a good question, Genevieve. They fall under a lot of our heavy duty regs. And I think with our advanced clean fleets, they might be included in that, but I can't say for sure.
The one that's saying all government agencies need to transition their fleets to electric.
Public fleets are part of that, right? So let me check to confirm. I don't know if school districts fall in some weird category, but let me double check. I'm thinking it may fall under that new reg.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I was gonna ask, because here it only shows what it was in the original SERP, 16 buses, and I think it was made clear by the initial discussions with not with the trustees, but just with the staff, that if there was not funding for like the charging station, then there's no point for them to have these type of electric buses. And I think that at least in the table of the discussions that we were having at our last in-person meeting, some of the residents like Lilia and Isabel and Estela said, well, yeah, that makes sense. So what if we modify and say, we might be, I mean, they were not too happy with the idea of decreasing the 16 buses, but I guess that since there might be other money that we can move around, it could still remain 16, but making sure that there's funding for the charging stations so that, it makes sense for them to take this leap of faith and investing in this type of buses.
Thank you, Nyami. I want to do a quick time check for everyone. We are at time for this agenda item, but I would hope that we can end sort of on a good transitioning point. I know there's still much needed continued discussion around this. So Nyami and Ryan, I'll look to you and how you want to wrap this up.
And then I have one more slide, and this is kind of the big one because this is where we get into where their CSC members have said maybe look at some other alternatives. And so we've kind of put together a list of some of the comments that we've received and maybe some opportunities and for the CSC to think about or show support for. So some of the measures that aren't moving, there's going to be maybe opportunities to either or make the measures that we're seeing, like if we're not seeing interest in it, there may be reasons. And so one of the things that the community steering committee members talked about was the incentive that is available for transitioning away from wood burning devices in their homes. And so the current incentive is $3,000, and that's including the replacing the unit and then getting it connected to natural gas. The recommendation, because what we're finding through as we're seeing everywhere, inflation and other things, we're seeing that those costs are more expensive, and almost any cost out of pocket has the potential to make these units that people can't take advantage of that. And so that was one of the things that we heard. And so one of the things we were thinking for that individual measure would be to raise it up from $3,000 to $4,000, where we believe at $4,000 it would cover 100% of a unit for low-income individuals and people living in the community. So another one would be to look to increase incentives for EV cars. We've seen anybody that maybe has looked at an electric vehicle over the last year. As an agency, we're looking to transition our fleet away from fuel combustion to electric. We have a plan for doing that, and we've been looking to purchase, and we've just seen the prices explode over the last year plus. And so, one of the things that we could maybe look to do would be to raise that up to a higher level to garner more interest from people looking in the community. So when they're making the choice, do I stick with gas? Do I look to go electric? Maybe this is the level where people will make the choice to look to go electric. Like I talked in the last slide, one of the possibilities for electric school buses to get more people to be able to do this, like Nyami was talking about, would be to add charging infrastructure as part of that. It's not in the SERP right now, so that we'd have to make that change in order to be able to fund that. It's on then the potentially add, and this is where we were talking about in-home air filtration, adding a new SERP measure to do that. And so what we could look to do, so right now the Stockton Community Emission Reduction Program, we have committed $1 million for the program. And it was based on kind of like proximity to sources that, focusing in areas where we think that it would probably be the highest levels of air pollution. And looking to focus that initially in those areas and then expand it out further. And so that's what we're working with that steering committee on right now. And then, as always, if there's other that you're through today's discussion, reviewing information, reviewing the existing CERP, if there's other things that you think that we should consider or look at, always let us know. A great opportunity for that agenda setting meetings. And so, or always feel free to email any of us here at the Air District.
Thank you, Ryan. Jen, I know that you're afraid of time, but I do also think that this is such a relevant and time-sensitive discussion that my opinion as a co-host is that we should continue it until we have a final recommendation or as close to a final recommendation for how to move around all these monies. And my only, and then I do have a couple of questions for you, Ryan. So one is, I think we not only need to say which are the measures that need more, but actually that need less funding based on our discussion. We had a discussion about if it's even worth it to continue the idea of giving the money to the Fresno school district when they didn't use the monies that they had from the other source, from the care funds in the right way. And so shall we even have that still as a SERP strategy? I also would say that, so that's one that I think of all your list, I think of based on our discussion, that will be needed here. And my clarification is for what you have here as indoor air filtration. I think what we heard were a variety of ideas that might not be totally captured here. For example, Lisa mentioned should we, for instance, fund people so that they could have the filters that you put, like the MERPs are 13 or 14 are more expensive, so something like that. So I think that we will need to flesh that more in detail, but I think that in general there was a recommendation of doing something to have more or improve air quality for homeowners, not only for the students in the schools. So with that, I also want to talk about the process. So for example, do we want to go one by one and then open it up for comments of CSC members and then have a vote? Or how do we want to do it? Because we're at 7:08. So any thoughts on the process of how we move on this discussion?
Yeah, do you want to hear from the community steering committee members, or do you want to hear for okay?
I think why don't you go ahead and say what your recommendation of the process would be, and then we can.
I think what you described is a good process. Going one by one and seeing what the interest of the steering committee or the level of support from the steering committee on each individual one, and then moving on to the next conversation that we're talking about now. Where potentially maybe that would come from.
Can you put your thumbs up if you agree with that process that we go one by one? Okay. I think, Lisa, are you okay? Oh yeah, I can see you're not. Perfect. So let's move on so that we don't delay this discussion. So thoughts on the first one, increase incentive for natural gas fireplaces.
Let's see, Genevieve has her hand up.
So do you want us to use our thumbs when we vote, Nyami, or use our hands?
Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we first hear if there's any discussion items, points related to this measure, and then we take it to a vote and we can do the thumbs up or your physical hand, whatever you feel comfortable. So I see Genevieve and Bill. So why don't we start with, and Lisa, my apologies.
Lisa looks like she's in front of me.
Okay, go ahead, Lisa.
My question is, once again, is 4,000 going to be enough since you're talking metal and also supply chain issues. We really need to think about that. 4,000 to me is fine, but this is already an incentive program that already exists and is fully running. I'm really super more interested in getting the ones that aren't up and running, because what I feel in my gut is we're going to continue to waste time here and things aren't going to get done. And we're going to have this big old pot and it's going to go to something like fireplaces. And also too, I would like to know from staff, what is the percentage of fireplaces out there that you're looking at that are there functioning? And what is the percentage that we have already switched over? What is the movement?
Very important question. So why don't we let the Air District staff respond those questions, and then I'll go to Genevieve and Bill.
Why don't you go to Genevieve and Bill first, Nyami, and come back to my.
You need more time?
Give me a second on that.
Sure, no problem. We'll come back to you, Ryan. Genevieve and then Bill.
Hi, yeah. So my thoughts on this have evolved a little bit recently. Especially there's been this whole building decarbonization movement, and I've learned a little bit, especially about. So I'll just read this. A meta-analysis of 41 studies found that children living in homes with gas stoves had a 42% higher risk of experiencing asthma symptoms, and over their lifetime, a 24% increase in the risk of being diagnosed with asthma. So my awareness of the safety of burning natural gas inside an enclosed home has changed, and it doesn't seem to be like a smart thing to do, especially if you have children in the home. So I actually worry about, and that study was just about a natural gas stove, and this is an entire fireplace. So I'm not sure if I want to keep supporting burning of natural gas inside homes. I think it could be better to have different ways of incentivizing people to heat their homes, like perhaps a credit on their energy bills or a plug-in electric heater or a heat pump, and then keep the natural gas things for outdoors, like replacing your outdoor fire pit with a natural gas fire pit. Because I know there's a lot of outdoor burning that happens that's not supposed to be happening. But that's my two thoughts, just how it kind of evolved. But I'm concerned about the health impacts of burning natural gas indoors.
Yeah, so maybe I can talk a little bit about that. I have those same concerns, Genevieve. I saw those same studies that talked about natural gas burning stoves and the inside air pollution and how that would translate to fireplaces. And so I did find quite a bit of studies on emissions from fireplaces, and because that is vented directly out of the roof, they found that the emissions from those thankfully to be relatively negligible in comparison to like a stove that's doesn't have that same level of ventilation. But I definitely hear what you're saying. The reason why this measures in here is because of kind of going back to the original emission inventory, and we talked about what one of the major drivers of wintertime PM 2.5 and is residential wood burning, and so getting people to stop that practice. And this is a permanent way to do that. You eliminate the people's ability to burn in their fireplace, and there's a huge benefit towards doing that. And so I think it does say natural gas, but I mean there's also our program has the ability to also change out to heat pumps. The thing I will say about the heat pumps that we've found, it is a costly transition, and for most people, the in addition just to the upfront cost, it's really the electric that we've heard people can't afford. It's very expensive to run a heat pump in comparison.
Thank you, Ryan. And I don't know if you need more time to respond to Lisa's question about the percentage of units that are still in need of being replaced. But if not, I'll give you more time. I'll go to Bill.
Yes, my question is, to clarify, is the intent of the program to stop the wood burning? Because if that's the intent, then perhaps you could offer incentive like to totally remove the fireplace for X, give X amount of dollars and not replace it with anything. Or perhaps they have, I see in stores, they have some of these electric fireplaces. They're more or less for limited heat, but they look real pretty. I don't know if they would have an electric version that would fit in the fireplace hole, which wouldn't cost nearly so much, because there's probably a lot of people that don't have natural gas available. Perhaps they use propane, or perhaps they're all electric, or they just rely on their wood burning fireplace. So with the regulations we have now, there's so many days you can't use a wood burning fireplace that they probably have some other heat source. So if they're not depending on their fireplace for heat, if they had something more decorative that could be put in the place of the insert and be electric, it would be a pretty simple installation, and maybe it wouldn't put out so much heat. But you could go online and they have units that look really nice. So if you just wanted to plug the hole in your fireplace and have something that looked nice and maybe gave out a limited amount of heat, that could be an alternative for some people if they weren't trying to replace the heat factor of using wood. That was just my comment.
Thank you, Bill. Brian?
Yeah, no, I mean, so to date we've replaced 34 fireplaces, and so like what we had in the SERP was 500. And some of the feedback we got about the program was that basically, like we talked about, anything out of pocket makes it like impossible for them to participate. And so the recommendation, and so where we got the $4,000 number, Lisa, that was basically, we know the cost of all the units that have been funded from the program, and it's coming in about the $3,600. And so that has a $400 like kind of gap between that for those units. And so that's where we got the $4,000.
And my follow-up question is, where did you get that, or why did you recommend or allocated funds for 500 units? We're at 34, and where that 500 came from? Is that like solid or like actual numbers? Like, do you have like a inventory of the home to have this type of devices?
Yeah, so we like every unit that we fund, we know the dollar amount on it. And so that's where it's coming from. And so what Brian and his team looked at was the kind of the projects done under the low income, which receives the highest incentive for that. Those units that were being replaced came in at that I think $3,500 range.
Okay, do we feel comfortable to take a vote on this recommendation of increasing the incentive funds for natural gas fireplaces?
I would actually like to see it raised a little bit more to 4,500, just for the simple fact of steel and metal prices are going to be going up. So we don't have to come back to this, so they can automatically go to and do that and get what they need to get, because prices are going up. Also, too, I would like to see what is the marketing time frame? Because I'm thinking, now's a good time for fall. Get people start thinking about things.
Yep.
Ryan, so can we move it up to $4,500?
I mean, I think it's like one of those things, right, Lisa? Like what we're doing right now. I would like to start with the 4,000 and see how it goes before moving it to 4,500. Because like I said, I mean, I think that like in our discussions with the manufacturers and the prices that we're seeing, that should cover the costs. And like I said, I mean, we did build in an additional buffer. We didn't just put it at the amount that we were seeing. I mean, we built in a pretty significant buffer in there too.
And
Okay.
Ryan, that includes money for, like, if you had to reroute the piping of your natural gas and pay a contractor to do that?
Correct.
Okay, cool. And but you have to pay for it all out of pocket, right? And then you get reimbursed?
So we were like, for the low income programs, there are some companies that will front the cost for doing it. So I think we would have those conversations. I mean, we would definitely look to hopefully find some people that would be interested in doing that for the South Central Fresno community.
Okay, so first, I think we all need to agree that if we will continue with the discussion, and I'm okay, I'm sorry. Well, I haven't asked the facilitators, but we are at 7:21. There's no way we're gonna finish by 7:30, and this has happened in other meetings. Are we okay to continue discussions? Don't stop our discussions just because of the sake of time. But
Let's go.
Okay, great. So are we ready to take a vote on this recommendation of increasing incentives for natural gas fireplaces? And if you are, let's please see a thumbs up from steering committee members. So if you are in agreement with the recommendation made here in the slide, please put your thumbs up. And if the facilitators can help us take a vote and make sure that whomever is voting are CSC members indeed.
I'm confirming you have a majority vote on that notion, Nyami.
Okay, perfect. So we are gonna make that recommendation. The next one are increasing incentives for EV cars. And I'll take the prerogative of going first since I'm already speaking. I'm against it. I think EV cars are wonderful, but EV cars are extremely expensive. So $20,000 is not, it sounds like a lot of money, but once you start adding everything that you need to buy an electric car, and I'm not just talking because I think it is, I went through the process and it is extremely expensive. So even if I get $20,000, but I wouldn't because I don't live in the area, but let's say that I would get it, I would still need to finance another $40,000. So I would like to know which percentage of the residents in the South Central Fresno would actually benefit from this. So my opinion is I don't agree with this recommendation, but I'm happy to hear what others think.
Wanola, I see your hand is up. Go for it.
Yeah, just speaking as someone who just recently bought a car, I agree. It's getting, especially with the interest rate that has just increased, with just in general federally, it is very expensive right now to even think about purchasing an electric car. Even just buying a car in general, it's expensive. So I definitely do agree. I feel like that could be, you know, I don't really agree with this incentive unless we're going to increase it to a substantial amount, where at least more than half of it is covered. It's honestly a big expense, and probably in another way it could be allocated to something else that would benefit more than just that small.
Thank you. Eric, do you want to say more about your comment here in the chat? You said you support increasing the measure for both new and used vehicles. So electric vehicles, we're talking about the same thing, right? So you would say, yes, let's put $20,000 instead of the $9,500, but we could allow the applicants to apply for new or used electric vehicles. Is that what your recommendation is?
Eric, could you verbalize it? Because I'm having a hard time reading, you know, because of the double cap. everything.
I'll read the chat. I don't know if maybe he can't access audio right now. So it says many low middle income families are impacted by the high cost of EV vehicles. So Nyami, to your question, I think his recommendation is to increase the funding for that. Eric, please chime in if you can.
Okay, well, we get Eric to be able to unmute. I see Genevieve's hand raised, so go ahead.
Yeah, and Eric is confirming on the chat. That was
Yeah.
the recommendation. Go ahead, Genevieve.
My question's about used EVs and how money could go to support the purchase of those. I know incentives on new cars, that's kind of easy, but does the district have any history with helping support the purchase of used EVs?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you asking that question. And yes, we do have a program. It's our Drive Clean in the San Joaquin program. And it does provide, considerable funds for replacement of older vehicles with used vehicles.
Awesome. Okay, could we then put in there incentives for new and used, as Eric suggested, like an amendment to that?
Yeah, I'm making a note of that one. I just need to probably talk, I don't know all the specifics on that and just kind of how that would work. I need to talk with our team, but that's a recommendation that we can definitely discuss and get more information.
So can we take a vote for this amended recommendation? So increase incentives for new and used electric vehicles?
No, I mean, sorry, Lisa, your hand is up. Are you voting or do you have a comment or question?
I'm actually voting, but I also would like to know something that Nyami had said. She said she was I always thought the program also included used cars as well. So that came kind of a shock to me today. And also Nyami was discussing about the additional 40 grand she would need to purchase this car. What's that about?
Yeah, well, I was just saying that if you want to go and buy an electric car, depending on what car you want, the cheapest one is 40,000 and then up, whatever the range of the car is, the model and so on. So after all the, whistles and everything, the average cost is 50 to 60,000 for a new electric car. So what I was saying is that even if I receive the $20,000 incentive, I would still need myself to pay for the difference, which would be 30 to 40,000. If I don't have that money at hand, which I don't, then I will have to finance it. That's the situation that we see. And, it's not only about the electric cars. I just want to mention that in the past, something that Lilia had mentioned is that, for example, in general, the program that helps people replace their old vehicles, it used to be 1999 and now is, I can't remember, 2006, I believe.
2006.
That in the past it was $9,000 that you would get if you had that old car. But now they increased that now it doesn't have to be 1999, it could be a 2006 car, but then you have to buy an electric or hybrid car. So what Lilia was mentioning is that even with the previous program, low-income people that have fixed incomes and all that, were having a hard time financing the rest of the car. And that's just a conventional car. My point was that it's even worse when you're talking about electric, because, I don't want to I cannot have a monthly payment of $600-500 a month to finance $30,000. But that's just me. That's my personal opinion. You guys think it's a great idea, we can take a vote and, make that recommendation. So probably we're ready for the vote. If you agree with this recommendation with the change that it will be for new and old or used EV cars, please raise your thumb.
We counted 7 votes in favor and in addition to Eric's, who submitted his vote in the chat. So that's a total of 8 votes in support of this.
Okay, and just to respond, make sure that we have that clarity. This is only for residents of AB 617 area, the South Central Fresno AB 617 area, correct?
Correct.
Yes, and okay, perfect. So I think there's the majority of members that are in favor of this one. Let's move to the next one. Add more charging infrastructure for school buses. Because right now that's not included in the SERP. I do want to make a recommendation. I think we need more charging infrastructure, but I think we need in general more buses, EV buses. 16 out of how many schools? That's nothing. So if anything, I think we need not only more money for charging infrastructure, but also more money for EV buses. Other thoughts on this measure?
I see Eric's comment. He's asking if we can delay this item until Greg Barfield is in the call.
So this, and I don't know if Eric's asking because Greg was responsible for the city of Fresno's fleet, and so he just has a lot of knowledge on the subject. But this would only apply to school district buses and wouldn't apply to
yes.
The city buses.
Plus Greg remembers a non-voting steering committee member. Oh, because Greg proposed the city being a regional charging bus hub for school districts. Okay, good point. I didn't recall that. Can we table that one, but can we do a new one that says that we should allocate more funding for electric buses for schools that are in the AB 617 area?
Yeah, I did make a note of that, Nyami.
So anyone in favor of adding more funding towards purchasing EV buses for schools in the AB 617 area? If you can raise your thumb if you're in agreement.
We had 8 votes in favor. And in addition to Eric's, through his chat, he makes a motion to add more funding as well.
Okay, so you mean?
I mean, I don't know if Dr. Curry has a question or if she's voting because her hand is up.
Great, that's a good point. Dr. Curry, are you voting or you have a comment?
Actually, yes, I am voting and I'm in support of adding more electric buses.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we're ready to move on. The new SERP measure for new indoor air filtration. I would like to I like the idea. I just would like to make a recommendation of keeping it broad so that it's not only about, it could be including purchasing an air purifier for homes that are in the AB 617 and that meet certain income thresholds, but also for what Lisa suggested of, some money to purchase the filters, the MERV filters.
Yeah, I think if the way that we wrote it up for Stockton, it left it kind of broad in the approach, and so we're discussing all options that would be available. The only consideration that I definitely heard a lot of interest in trying to get this as quickly as possible, and so trying to figure out the logistics and just kind of narrowing that down, and that may take some additional time. So just kind of, as far as expectations, probably the more broad the program is, it may take more time to kind of hammer out all the details. But yeah, I mean, I absolutely can. I think what we would look to do would be set up a subcommittee and kind of work through all that.
And you already have a volunteer. Genevieve said she is more than happy to assist in the development of the guidelines and logistics. So.
Fantastic.
Bravo, Genevieve. Thank you. Okay, so can we take a vote? I think there's not a lot more to discuss, but to say if we are in favor of this or not. So if you are in favor, can you raise your thumb?
There's a majority vote of eight in favor.
Perfect. Okay, and the last one, other existing measures where we would like to see more funding, but also what I mentioned at the top of this discussion, or less funding. So for example, when we discussed the idea of the funding for the air filters in the schools, I think that we could say that, you know, we have, if you feel comfortable, we can have one last discussion with very definite timelines to the schools, and if we don't hear from them with a proposal on we would need this much money for these schools, that then we make a recommendation of moving that money to another SERP strategy. Staffing. So Eric is recommending funding towards staffing. Is that staffing of the school staff, or?
I think Eric's talking in regards to specifically the position that he was talking about earlier.
Oh, okay, that position. Yeah, well, and I see Lisa's hand. Go ahead, Lisa.
I think with the school district, I think somebody needs to have a very hard discussion with them and tell them that they need to come up with their plan for this money that we have by the 15th of June. And they also have to come up with a very good explanation. How come they did not use the CARES Act money? Or how are they going to supplement whatever money they have from the CARES to piggyback on this? Because we should see some good faith money and they shouldn't depend 100% on us. But I do think that you need to give them a timeline. If not, we just move the money. You need to tell them it's a hard deadline.
Okay, so just so that we can take a vote, can I narrow down the kind of like the recommendation that there is a timeline given to the school districts, and that they are very explicit as of, you know, they have the commitment and the ability to install these filters and say how many classrooms and so on. I don't think we might have the authority to make them explain to us why they didn't do it with the CARE funding, but one way of doing it is perhaps saying, how are they going to ensure to us that they're not double dipping, that this is something different to what they were supposed to do with the CARE funds?
Nyami, the question they have to answer, is there any other matching funds that could go along with this, or have you received any funds specifically for this?
That sounds perfect.
Please explain.
Yeah. Okay, well, can we take a vote on that recommendation of giving a timeline to the school districts? And then, you know, hopefully by our next meeting or in July, we can take a decision to see if this money has to be moved to another SERP measure. So if you're in agreement with that, please put your thumbs up.
All right, we have a majority vote of 7 in favor of that recommendation.
Okay, last but not least, I think let's give a short timeline. Yes, a very short timeline. We need to make them do this ASAP, especially because once they start their vacation, God knows we're going to be hunting them before we can hear from them. But the last thing is, Eric, are you able to unmute yourself and explain your idea, your recommendation of this position, and I guess your proposal of using AB 617 money to fund this?
Yes, hello, can you all hear me? Thumbs up?
Yes.
Okay.
So I've kind of shared in detail just what my position is relative to the request in the chat, just to have a written record if there's any uncertainty or unclarity about what my request is. So I will kind of pass it back to the Air District if they have other thoughts relative to both my initial proposed resolution and the alternative resolution that I offered.
I'm sorry, Eric, if you dropped it in the chat, I may have missed the resolutions that you're speaking to.
Yeah, so one was, I guess if CARB, based on the communication that I received from the Air District staff, that if there was any, if the Air District felt differently about what the request was that I was making around the hiring of a chief environmental justice officer at the Air District, then the first alternative option that I had recommended was the Air District seek clarity from legal counsel at CARB on the question at hand. And then secondly, if the Air District had no interest in sending a letter seeking clarity to Chief Legal Counsel at CARB, then offering a memo of concern from CSC members.
Okay, so I think part of the reason is that, just out of confusion. So one of the responsibilities that I was given was to oversee our community engagement efforts. That's one of my roles. So you pointed to Veronica Eady, for example. And so my responsibility is to serve in that same role as Veronica for the district's efforts. And towards that end, we've instituted a lot of things to learn to better engage. I mean, to me, it's about the engagement with the community steering committee members and how do we look to do that better. And I think we have so many examples of how we've done that. Kind of going back to the beginning with translation and interpretation, there were challenges. So what we did was, in response to that, we got more staff capable of interpreting. We got more interpreters for the meetings, especially as we transitioned to the Zoom environment, and figured it out logistically, how do we do that to make sure that everybody is fully capable of fully participating in these meetings. Internally as an organization, understanding that we need to be better prepared in how we interact and engage and talk with community members as an organization, because it's not just one person that's talking to community. It's the whole organization. I mean, I have the same level of the expectation for every single one of our members at our organization to be able to go out and speak to anybody in the community in a respectful, mindful manner. And it's not from one person, it's from an organizational standpoint. And I have so much respect for my APCO, because he instills that in me. He constantly reminds me that we need to be focusing on that. We need to be doing more. So, we've engaged with Fresno State to get additional training for all of our staff, not just a few individuals that are working on the program, but all staff, on how we do that better, how we do that more effectively. And ultimately, it's about the feedback that we're getting. If there's specific things about concerns about diversity, equity, inclusion, or those types of things, raising it as an issue so that we can look to address it, and dealing with those on an individual basis when those things come up as an organization, not on an individual level. So Eric, when we say I don't understand, it's because it's because I believe we're doing that, and in regards to the bigger efforts that we're doing, like in my role, I meet with all those people that you're talking about. I participate in all the discussions. We learn from each other. We look to transfer the things that they're learning and bring it here. And we're sharing things that we think are successful, and they're taking it there. And so the things that I think you're asking for, in my mind, we're doing. It's happening. Whether it's a title that you're looking for, to me, it's about the actions. It's about what's being done, and I believe we are doing it. So that's where I'm a little confused.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think we share two different perspectives on goals and objectives relative to implementation of the CERP and institutional compliance around this diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation. So specifically looking at how an organization institutionalizes a document like that to shift culture change. It's been done at the state level, and it's been done by other public agencies at the local level that we can point to that have implemented strategic diversity, equity, and inclusion plans, right? So those are procedural instances that shift cultural change at the organization, right? Looking at how it took us 2.5 years, right? We're talking about a 5-year timeline here, 2.5 years to implement just execute an MOU agreement around a reroute study. At a short, small benchmark that is inclusive of this plan. And I think that, one of the things that I always say is many hands make light work. Right. So we don't have to do everything and be everything to everybody. If we have a team that can support us and be strategic in some of these efforts and initiatives to help push some of these objectives forward. I think looking at some of the things in the CERT plan that haven't even been touched yet that really center the heart of environmental justice and how we just miss the mark and we fall short in some of those areas. And I really think that this could be a real game changer for the organization to implement some of these more smaller changes around being inclusive with a chief environmental justice officer to help give focus and help with this lift.
Can I hear reactions from other steering committee members? Go ahead, Lisa.
I have to totally agree with Eric. Sorry, Ryan, you and I have gone rounds and rounds offline and over the phone about certain things. I think that there needs to be some culture change. I think that what Eric is asking for is not the sun and the moon. It's a piece of paper. I mean, it's something very simple. And I don't think it's asking for a lot. And I think that he's coming forward very earnestly about invoking change and looking at a mechanism to invoke change. And I think that we should, I totally support him in this because what year are we in? We're in year 3 of this, and look how far we're at. And so there is some systematic problems here. And if this could be part of the solution and part of making the situation better, not only for ourselves, but also potentially for other areas that are also going through this or beginning this process, why not?
Yeah,
that's the nicest way I can say stuff at this time.
No, and I appreciate both yours and Eric's honest, heartfelt thoughts on that topic. What I would like to point out, so having worked firsthand with, for example, Veronica Edie in Bay Area and understanding her roles and responsibilities, I believe we're doing those things. I respect what Eric's feelings are, but that position is not, it's not an implementation. So I mean, like when he's talking about an MOU, that's not, to me, that's not a shortcoming of the district. You know, that's a shortcoming of the legislation, and that there's not a requirement for these things to happen. And there's got to be collaborating, working with different agencies to try to get these things done. And, you know, we just had a successful truck reroute study. It took a long time, understand that, but it happened. And, you know, so to me, that position is not about the implementation. It's about how you go about interacting and engaging with communities.
And Ryan, I think it would be
I want to make sure that there's a distinction between the two. So when we're talking about it, everybody understands that.
I think it would just be very, very helpful, actually. And I understand your position where you would be upset of his ask, but you know, it's coming from the committee, and if the committee votes yes, let's do this ask, then let's just get it done and move on. See what the answer is.
So, you said I am clear. So Eric, what you would like for us as the CSC here to do is to make a recommendation of the air district creating this position and using some of the AB 617 funds to fund it. Is that the recommendation?
Yes.
Okay. So I know that we have lost several multiple community or steering committee members. So why don't we take let me say this to see if you agree with it. Why don't we take a pulse right now? What's the reaction of people who are still here, but because again, there's a lot of members that have left already. I think it would merit that they have also the chance to give their opinion and vote. So why don't we take a pause, mark it on our notes, and then revisit it at our next meeting, or continuing the discussion at our next meeting. Would that feel okay? I would hate to leave out in this vote or in this important moment key members who had left the meeting tonight. Eric?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would kind of like ask clarity on is the time sensitivity of submitting this document and getting it to the Air District Board. Would staff be able to advise?
Say that one more time, Eric.
Yeah, just the time sensitivity of this item with adopting it today versus adopting it at our next meeting. Or would it require a special meeting for us to adopt it to get it to, you know, the full authority of the Air District Board for inclusion?
So so you're talking about putting together an item for our board, is that correct, Eric?
Yeah, I'm sorry. If we adopt this today, will that create if we don't adopt this today, will that create a delay of some sort, or will it not create a delay?
You know, and this kind of gets to the limitations of this legislation. I mean, the CSC could make a recommendation on something, but it wouldn't be adopted and wouldn't happen. I mean, I don't want to, like, at the same time, I want to, you know, encourage conversation and talk about these things, but I also don't want to mislead and set expectations that may not happen, which then further causes more frustration. You know, as a steering committee, the steering committee can't make a decision on, you know, the district's, you know, positions at the organization. You know, if there's a sense that there's a desire for certain things, then the steering committee absolutely can elevate that and make requests. But it wouldn't be by this steering committee, you know, voting and saying they would like that then becomes an actuality and that moves forward and that happens. So I just want to make sure that that is clear.
So Nyami, were you looking for a motion from me to move the recommendation forward for
just
staff and
yes.
the air district to consider the item?
Yeah. Well, because we
And
have
I'll
been
second.
okay, go ahead.
Oh, I'll second Eric.
All right, yeah, I make the motion. It's been seconded. So I guess there's a vote.
Can steering committee members raise your thumbs if you are in favor of the motion?
Because this has come up in the past, and I just want to avoid these types of situations. And I mean, when we've typically taken votes after the agendized times, there have been concerns raised that it's improper and it's unfair to those that were in attendance earlier. So I just.
Yeah, and that's why I agree, and that's why I made that recommendation that at least right now it's like taking the vote of those who are present at the moment, and perhaps procedurally we can extend that opportunity for the others who missed the meeting or left earlier to chime in or give their opinion via email, for example. But I didn't want us to leave and not have the opportunity to make a formal, at least have it as a motion and see what the recommendation or the feelings are from those present right now.
Also, too, just to let you know
Yeah,
that
I think if
excuse me, Eric, for a moment. Also, too, just to remind you guys that this was agendized because I, asked that it be put on the agenda. We agreed that. When we hit around the 7:30 mark, we asked if we were going to continue. At that time should have been this discussion. Everybody, there was a consensus to continue. So if people left, people left. So coming back and saying, well, I don't know if,
Now,
you can count this vote. Come on.
One thing I would like to raise too, though, Lisa, it wasn't on the agenda that was printed. So, I mean, there may be steering committee members that did not know that this was going to be discussed tonight. So it was agendized for those people that were in attendance at tonight's meeting.
And that's what typically happens at these types of meetings. No matter where you go, you can't cry, well, you didn't tell me it was going to be on there because someone walked in and said, can you please put it on there? It's just something that happens in life. Furthermore, he had previously asked for this to be put on the agenda and it wasn't. So,
well,
I'm getting a lot of
let's just take a vote and move on, please.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would like to note, for the record, there was majority vote to acknowledge this recommendation. Eric, it's loud and clear that I think the CSC has a lot of interest in this. I do hear the points that it is unfair to exclude folks, but we had majority vote anyway. So this is a topic we can definitely revisit in the future. I think it needs further discussion. In terms of actionable items, I'm looking to you all, like the CSC and Air District, and what would be the best way to move this forward in the meantime until we revisit this conversation.
So for clarity, are you saying that because staff is proposing we vet this conversation further? Or are you saying because the motion as presented and the motion has been seconded that we can now take a vote on it, but you're adding stipulations to it? I'm not clear on your position, Jen.
No, I'm not suggesting adding stipulations. I am just recognizing that there was a majority vote in support of your recommendation. Also noting what Ryan said about what these votes mean on CSC and what actions are taken after that, right? So it's the majority vote indicates that this is an item that we will continue to revisit and discuss. I'm noting that you did say there is a sense of urgency around this.
So why do we need, I'm sorry, for clarity, why do we need to revisit it if the committee is moving the item forward?
Well, the item is
when we haven't taken a vote yet.
Oh, we did take a vote.
It was just the first and the second. We haven't taken a vote to move the recommendation forward. I'm assuming that people would want to see a chief environmental justice officer at the organization based on some of the delays and some of the organizational barriers that we've run into as a CSC committee that looks to center environmental justice. But I haven't, again, I'm hearing conflicting information or misinformation from Air District staff relative to the item. So I think to simplify my request, making a motion to move the item forward and letting it fall where it may in the hands of staff and the Air District board.
Can we get more specific in terms of moving the item forward? That is for Air District to consider your recommendation, but can you provide a specific actionable item?
I believe you put it in the chat. Correct, Eric? You codified it in your chat.
Yeah, I did. And so
also
the recommendation is to propose the hiring of a chief environmental justice officer for the Air District.
Okay, so the recommendation is to create a position and for CSC funds to be allocated toward that position, correct, Eric?
Yes.
Okay.
That was what I said before. That was what was meant. Second, and Eric, I did ask if you guys were, if the steering committee members present right now were in favor to give a thumbs up, and Jen counted the votes. That's why we were saying that a vote has been taken already.
And I want to lift up, thank you, Nyami, and I want to lift up Brian's point about what this means moving forward. So we have officially counted your votes and there is majority in favor of this, but Brian is lifted up in full transparency, the full authority that the CSC holds. And so I want to make sure everyone is clear with what follows.
Well, I think we can recommend this, just like we recommend, for example, that there's a subcommittee put together for, discuss the air filtration and all that. There could be a recommendations that we are instructing or asking their district to, or the facilitators to send this motion to the steering committee members who had to leave, and so that they could express their opinion about it. I also understand, Ryan, that we are not saying that because we are making this recommendation or we're expressing this, that your board is going to turn around and do it, and that this is going to have to continue a discussion in many, many other places, which, if it has to happen, it has to happen. I encourage a lot of us here to use the other spaces that their district has to put this recommendation forward as well. For example, there's the Environmental Justice Advisory Group that meets quarterly. So I highly recommend that there's a group of us here go and make this, even if it's only in public comments, or request that this item is included in the next agenda. I think there's also the opportunity to come to the board meeting, and even if it's not agenda item, we can actually make comments on this. So there's different ways in which this idea can be pursued in addition to what we are doing tonight, because we understand, Ryan, that this, not because we have recommended it's going to happen, but we also know that there's other avenues to speak up.
And I personally would like to see if they shoot it down, what is their explanation? Looking forward to that.
Okay, we will make that an action item. Thank you, Eric and Nyami and Lisa, for clarifying. Are there any more comments?
I just wanted to say thank the staff for creating the space to have the dialogue. I appreciate it, Ryan. and also to our facilitators and to the committee for taking the action to move the item forward. Thank you.
Same, Eric.
Thank you all. I know we're way past time, so we are not going to continue with all the other items that were in the agenda to be respectful with everybody. I know we're tired. I am hungry. I don't know about you. So we will table those, and please make sure that you send your recommendations or come to the next agenda setting meeting so that we can see, these that were tabled obviously will have a priority, but what else should be discussed at our next meeting?
Thank you, Nyami. To that point, we are going to send a survey that will to everyone that will follow up with this budget participatory budget discussion. In that will be another opportunity for folks to submit their feedback, any ideas that maybe came after this discussion. So there will be on the lookout for that. We'll keep it open for a few weeks so you all have the opportunity to still submit your feedback after today's discussion. This is your time, and I know we have a few things on the agenda item, so I'm going to look to the CSC. My proposal is to skip the standing updates unless there's something time sensitive that needs the CSC's attention. So unless there's any objection to that, I will propose we leave standing updates to emails unless there is a time sensitive update that the CSC needs to provide input on. Are there any objections to that? Okay. And then I will look to the subcommittees. Are there any time sensitive updates that the CSC needs to provide input or feedback on? Okay. Lastly, we do usually go over the action items. We've noted a lot tonight. We can also send that via email unless you would also like to review that tonight. So our proposal is to send the action items via email, but I'm asking for any objections if they would like to hear it tonight. Okay. All right. I know you're all tired. Thank you for hanging in there. It was a really productive conversation.
You need to do public comments.
Yes, I appreciate the engagement. I was going to open the space for any announcements from the community for the CSC, and then we'll open it up to public comments. So first, any announcements you would like to make to your colleagues? This is the space and time.
Well, yeah, and I am surprised that this was not mentioned before, but please take a look at the RFP that the Air District issued a couple of weeks ago for the, what is it called, the pilot? I always forget the name, the clean.
Oh, the clean air grants. I mean, the Clean Air Center.
Yeah, so I think that is an important thing because it ties to something we discussed in depth today, and that it will allow, other parts of non-AB 617 neighborhoods to benefit from it. So if you want to give a quick summary, Ryan, I think it's important because we are not, the deadline comes before our next meeting.
Yeah, so we received funding to start up a pilot program. And this is at the point I will turn it over to Brian Dodds to talk more about that as the program manager in the incentives department who's overseeing that.
Yeah, so we did open that solicitation about a week ago. It's open through the month of May. The program's designed to provide funding for public spaces, community centers, could be libraries, just anywhere that the public could gather in the event of wildfire smoke impacts. The idea is that this funding will allow the purchase of like portable air filters so that when there are those impacts, they can be deployed at these community centers and offer a space for residents in those impacted areas to go, similar to like a cooling center when it's hot, but they can go to these areas where there'd be cleaner air than if these portable filters didn't exist. So it's open to a variety of community groups and cities, counties, just places where community members could potentially gather when these occurrences happen. Applications are currently open, and as always, we're happy to answer any questions and help out in any way that we possibly can if you contact our team.
I dropped the link in the chat. It's on our homepage. It's one of the featured items on the very front. So if anybody visits our webpage or visits that link in the chat, you can get all the information on it. And thank you for reminding and bringing that up, Nyami.
Thank you all. Are there any other announcements you'd like to make to your fellow community steering committee?
I just want to thank Nyami for doing a really tremendous job leading tonight's discussion and getting us through a lot of information and all the work that you did in helping to prepare the materials that we presented tonight. And so just thank you.
And just really quick reminder, we'd love to see any of you out on Saturday morning for the lawnmower exchange.
So yeah, it took a lot of work. We did a lot of outreach, and I know a lot of you outreached, and it looks like we're right there at the, having all of them reserved. So great job.
Thank you. Thanks all. Yes, I echo Ryan. Thank you, Nyami, for your amazing co-hosting tonight. My last announcement would be for our next meeting. So our agenda setting meeting is next Wednesday, May 18th at 4:30 p.m. And our next community steering committee meeting will be Wednesday, June 15th. So back to second Wednesdays. I will now open it up for public comments. Laura, I see your hand is up. Go for it.
Hello. Yeah, I'd like to mention that in the hardware store, a lot of the air filters don't remove PM 2.5. Only 1 out of the 5 bottles work. So make sure they get the right one. The second thing, I wanted to do a bit of a health survey since I've been seeing some common symptoms in Southwest Fresno. I wonder, does everyone here have muscle cramps or numbness or spontaneous pain, paresthesia, dyskinesia, acute inflammatory? No, actually, the thing is, the problem with the feet is a problem mostly with the feet, ankles, hand, and wrist, peripheral neuropathy, and also maybe loss of night vision and renal insufficiency, peripheral vascular disease. What did I read? Gangrene of the extremities in some worst cases. Lesions. All right. So let's read the other symptoms. Thickening of skin, hair loss, dehydration, muscle cramps and tingling, abnormal heart rhythm, diarrhea, nausea, anemia, lines in fingernails, headaches, confusing, drowsiness. All right, let's see. Strokes.
Laura, we are way over time, so if you can keep your comment short, please, because we're almost 2 hours over our time.
All right, that's enough. Does anyone have any of those symptoms? Because somebody's been complaining of those specific symptoms, and they're linked to arsenic poisoning, which arsenic is used in the chicken farms, maybe like Foster Farms.
Thank you for bringing that attention to our attention, Laura.
Because someone I know is talking about those very symptoms, and they live right next to Foster Farms there in Southwest Fresno. They've been having these strange symptoms at a young age. They're young, and they're having all these problems.
I understand. Perhaps this is something to raise to the local public health department or the city. And we appreciate you bringing that to our attention as well. Thank you. Are there any more public comments or questions? Okay, all right. Thank you everyone for an engaging evening. We will see you next week for those who come to the agenda setting meeting.
Good night.